The screech of motorcycle tires against asphalt shattered the peaceful afternoon at Riverside Veterans Memorial Park, where Lieutenant Commander Rebecca "Becca" Hayes sat feeding ducks with her 4-year-old niece, Lily. The pristine autumn day had offered a rare moment of tranquility for the decorated Navy veteran whose world had been forever changed by an IED explosion in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. Now, as 5 leather-clad figures dismounted their bikes and swaggered toward the memorial benches with obvious, malicious intent, Becca felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once served her well in combat zones, even as her wheelchair-bound reality reminded her that this confrontation would be unlike any she'd faced before. The leader of the group, a massive man with a scraggly beard and arms covered in crude tattoos, kicked over a small American flag that had been placed beside one of the memorial stones. The casual disrespect sent a chill through Becca's spine, not from fear, but from the deep, visceral anger that came from watching someone desecrate the symbols her brothers and sisters had died defending. Little Lily looked up at her aunt with wide, confused eyes as the men's raucous laughter echoed across the normally serene park. "Look what we got here! Boys!" the leader called out, his voice dripping with mock sympathy as he spotted Becca in her wheelchair. "A little tin soldier playing war hero with her kid?" His companions laughed with the cruel enthusiasm of bullies who had found what they perceived to be an easy target. "Maybe we should teach them both some respect for their betters." Becca positioned her wheelchair protectively in front of Lily, her combat-trained mind automatically assessing threats and calculating options. Her service weapon was locked in her car's glove compartment, standard protocol when visiting public spaces with her niece, but her hands remained steady on her wheelchair's controls. Years of physical therapy had given her upper body strength that most people underestimated, and her tactical training hadn't been erased by her injuries. "Gentlemen," Becca said calmly, her officer's voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, "this is a Veterans Memorial Park. I suggest you show appropriate respect and move along." The leader's face darkened with anger at being addressed so directly. "Did this cripple just give us orders?" he snarled, taking a menacing step forward. "Maybe we need to remind her what happens when people don't know their place." Unknown to the 5 thugs terrorizing Becca and Lily, their confrontation was being observed from multiple vantage points around the park. What appeared to be casual joggers, dog walkers, and park maintenance workers were actually members of SEAL Team 7, conducting a routine training exercise in urban surveillance and rapid response. Their commanding officer, Captain Mike Razor Kowalski, had been Becca's commanding officer during her last deployment, and every member of his team knew the story of Lieutenant Commander Hayes, how she'd saved 18 Marines during a Taliban ambush, losing both legs in the explosion that should have killed her entire unit. The team had been using encrypted communications to coordinate their training exercise when they'd spotted the bikers' arrival and subsequent harassment of the disabled veteran and child. What had started as a routine training scenario was rapidly becoming something far more personal and urgent. "That's Phoenix," Razor whispered into his comm unit, using Becca's old call sign. "Those idiots have no idea what they just walked into." Through their high-powered surveillance equipment, the SEALs watched as the situation escalated. The largest biker grabbed the handles of Becca's wheelchair, trying to spin her around like a playground toy, while his companions laughed and made crude jokes about her disability. Lily began crying, clinging to her aunt's arm, terrified by the grown men who towered over them with obvious hostile intent. "Please," Becca said, fighting to keep her voice level for Lily's sake, "there's no need to involve the child. Whatever problem you have is with me." "The problem is you exist," the leader spat, his breath reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. "Coming to our town, taking up space, thinking you deserve special treatment because you couldn't do your job right overseas." He gestured mockingly at her wheelchair. "Real soldiers come home in one piece." The comment hit its intended target, bringing up the survivor's guilt and self-doubt that Becca still battled in therapy. But it also triggered something else. The protective fury of a warrior who had never backed down from a fight, regardless of the odds. Her hand moved subtly to the tactical knife she kept concealed in her wheelchair's side pocket. A last resort she hoped wouldn't be necessary with Lily present. Tango 1. "This is Overwatch," came the voice in Razor's earpiece. "We have multiple civilians in the area, but clear sight lines on all 5 targets. Awaiting orders." Razor checked his watch. Their response training scenario called for a 20-minute observation period before intervention, but watching his former XO being terrorized by drunk cowards made every second feel like an eternity. "All units begin approach. Standard formation, non-lethal takedown protocols. These losers are about to learn why you don't mess with family." The 5 bikers were so focused on their harassment of Becca and Lily that they completely failed to notice the casual pedestrians who had begun, closing in from multiple directions. To the untrained eye, it looked like coincidental foot traffic, a jogger stretching against a nearby tree, a maintenance worker emptying a trash can, a man walking his dog along the path. But to anyone with tactical training, it was obviously a perfectly coordinated pincer movement, executed with the precision of operators who had conducted similar maneuvers in far more dangerous situations. "Last chance to walk away," Becca warned, though she knew her words would likely have the opposite effect. Men like these fed on perceived weakness, and they had mistaken her attempts at de-escalation for fear. She was buying time, hoping that someone would call the police or that the confrontation would somehow resolve itself before violence became inevitable. The leader reached down and grabbed Lily's arm, apparently intending to use the child as leverage to further intimidate Becca. "Maybe we should take the kid for a little ride," he sneered. "Teach her some manners while we're at it." That was the moment Razor's team decided 20 minutes was long enough. The first biker never saw what hit him. One moment he was reaching for Lily, and the next he was face down on the pavement with his arm twisted behind his back in a submission hold that made further movement impossible. The jogger, who had appeared from nowhere, stood over him with the calm professionalism of someone for whom such takedowns were routine business. The second and third bikers spun around in confusion, trying to process how their friend had been neutralized so quickly, only to find themselves facing what appeared to be ordinary park visitors who had suddenly materialized around them with the coordinated precision of a military unit. The dog walker had somehow closed a 20-foot gap in seconds and was now standing close enough to strike, while the maintenance worker had abandoned his trash duties and was approaching from the opposite direction. "What the hell?" the leader started to say, but his words were cut off as he found himself staring into the eyes of a man who radiated the kind of controlled lethality that came from years of high-stakes combat operations. "Captain Mike Kowalski, United States Navy SEALs," Razor said quietly, his voice carrying none of the theatrical bravado the bikers had been displaying. "And you gentlemen have made a very serious mistake." The transformation in the bikers' attitude was immediate and dramatic. The swagger and cruel confidence evaporated as they suddenly realized they were outnumbered and outclassed by professionals who had spent their careers learning how to neutralize much more dangerous threats than a group of weekend warriors with anger management issues. "We weren't doing nothing," the leader stammered. All traces of his earlier aggression replaced by the whining tone of a bully suddenly faced with real consequences. "Just having some fun with the local talent." "Fun?" Razor's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You call terrorizing a decorated combat veteran and a 4-year-old child fun?" For the first time, the bikers seemed to really see Becca, not as a vulnerable target, but as someone who commanded the obvious respect of these clearly dangerous men. The combat ribbons on her jacket, which they had dismissed as meaningless decoration, suddenly took on new significance when viewed through the lens of professional soldiers who understood what those awards represented. "Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes," Razor continued, his voice now carrying the formal tone of a military briefing. "Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire. Purple Heart. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. 3 combat deployments. 18 Marines saved during enemy contact. Wounded in action while providing covering fire for medical evacuation." Each word hit the bikers like a physical blow as they began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They had chosen to harass not just any disabled veteran, but a legitimate war hero whose sacrifice had saved American lives on foreign battlefields. "Now," Razor said, stepping closer to the leader while his team maintained their positions around the other 4 men, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Lieutenant Commander Hayes and her niece. You're going to pick up that flag you knocked over and place it respectfully where it belongs. And then you're going to leave this park and never come back. And if we don't?" one of the bikers asked with false bravado, apparently still not grasping the reality of their situation. Razor smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made smart people very nervous. "Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, we're conducting a training exercise in rapid response and urban combat tactics. We'd be happy to use you gentlemen as realistic training targets if you'd prefer that option." The leader of the bikers looked around at the 5 Navy SEALs who had materialized seemingly from nowhere, then at Becca, who was watching the proceedings with the calm satisfaction of someone seeing justice served. His earlier confidence had been completely replaced by the dawning realization that he and his friends were completely out of their depth. We didn't know," he stammered. "We were just terrorizing a war hero and a child," finished Petty Officer First Class Johnson, one of Razor's team members. "Yeah, we saw the whole thing. Very impressive display of courage, picking on someone in a wheelchair." The sarcasm in Johnson's voice was devastating, and the bikers visibly shrank under the withering contempt of men who had faced real danger and recognized cowardice when they saw it. One by one, the 5 bikers approached Becca's wheelchair. Their apologies were stilted and obviously forced, but they were apologies nonetheless. The leader carefully picked up the American flag he had knocked over, holding it with exaggerated reverence as he placed it back in its proper position beside the memorial stone. "Ma'am," he said to Becca, unable to meet her eyes, "we're sorry for the disrespect. We didn't realize—" "You didn't realize I was human?" Becca asked quietly. "You didn't realize that veterans, disabled or otherwise, deserve basic dignity? Or you just didn't realize there might be consequences for being bullies?" The question hung in the air unanswered as the bikers shuffled toward their motorcycles under the watchful eyes of the SEAL team. Their earlier swagger had been completely replaced by the hurried movements of people desperate to escape a situation that had gone very wrong for them. As the motorcycles roared to life and disappeared down the park's main road, Razor approached Becca's wheelchair and dropped to one knee so they were at eye level. Lily, who had stopped crying and was now staring at the Navy SEALs with wide-eyed fascination, peeked out from behind her aunt's arm. "You okay, Phoenix?" Razor asked, using her old call sign with the familiarity of someone who had served alongside her in combat. Becca smiled, her first genuine smile of the afternoon. "I had the situation under control, Captain." "I know you did," Razor replied with a grin. "But we were in the neighborhood conducting training exercises, and the boys needed some practice in rapid response scenarios. Those idiots just happened to provide the perfect teaching moment." "Uncle Mike!" Lily suddenly exclaimed, recognizing Razor from family photos and previous visits. The tension that had gripped the park for the past 20 minutes dissolved into laughter as the 4-year-old launched herself into the arms of the Navy SEAL captain, who was also her honorary uncle. "Hey there, kiddo," Razor said, scooping Lily up and spinning her around. "Were you taking care of your Aunt Becca?" "The mean men were scary," Lily said seriously, "but Aunt Becca wasn't afraid of them." "That's because your Aunt Becca is one of the bravest people I've ever known," Razor replied, looking back at his former executive officer with obvious pride and respect. As the SEAL team began to disperse, returning to their interrupted training exercise, other park visitors who had witnessed the confrontation began approaching Becca and Lily. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and soon there was a steady stream of people stopping by to thank Becca for her service and to express their outrage at how she had been treated. An elderly Korean War veteran named Harold stopped by with his wife, Mary, bringing flowers from their garden to place at the memorial. "Young lady," Harold said, shaking Becca's hand with the firm grip of someone who understood the bonds of military service, "what those idiots did was disgraceful. But watching those Navy boys handle the situation, that was something to see." Mary nodded enthusiastically. We called the police when we saw what was happening, but by the time they got here, your friends had already sent those bullies packing with their tails between their legs. As the afternoon sun began to set over the Veterans Memorial Park, Becca reflected on the unexpected turn the day had taken. She had come here seeking peace and quiet, hoping to share with Lily the importance of remembering those who had served and sacrificed. Instead, they had encountered the worst kind of civilian ignorance and cruelty, followed immediately by a reminder of the brotherhood that bound military personnel together across service branches and generations. The bikers had seen her wheelchair and assumed weakness, vulnerability, an easy target for their twisted idea of entertainment. They had been wrong on every count, but more importantly, they had failed to understand that veterans never truly serve alone. The bonds forged in military service create a family that extends far beyond active duty, a network of people who will always have each other's backs when the stakes are high. Later that evening, as Becca tucked Lily into bed and listened to her niece's excited retelling of their adventure at the park, she received a text from Razor. "Training exercise went well today. The boys said to tell you they're always available for backup if you need it. Hooyah, Phoenix." Becca smiled as she typed her response. "Roger that, Captain. Thanks for the assist. Phoenix out." The 5 bikers who had thought they were so tough that afternoon were probably nursing their wounded pride in some bar across town, telling themselves they had backed down to avoid trouble rather than admitting they had been completely outclassed. But the real story, the story that would be told in VFW halls and American Legion posts across the country, was about what happened when bullies made the mistake of targeting someone whose family included some of the most elite warriors in the world. It was a story about respect, about the unbreakable bonds between those who have served, and about the swift justice that awaits anyone foolish enough to mistake a uniform or a wheelchair for a sign of weakness. Most importantly, it was a reminder that heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful response to ignorance and hatred is the simple presence of good people willing to stand up for what's right.